He came home at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, smelling like someone else's perfume and smiling like he'd just won something. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile that had gone cold an hour ago. I'd been there since 9 when his phone went straight to voicemail for the 6th time. I'd made dinner, roasted chicken, the kind he always said was his favorite, with the lemon and the thyme. And it was still sitting on the stove in the pan with the lid on it, the way you keep food warm for someone you're still expecting to show up. He walked in, dropped his keys on the counter and said, "You didn't have to wait up." I looked at him. I wasn't waiting up. I was just sitting here. He opened the fridge, grabbed a beer, and leaned against the counter like it was any other night. Like I hadn't spent the last 3 hours cycling through every possible explanation. Accident, hospital, phone died, meeting ran late. I'd even opened the Find My app at 9:30 and stared at the little blue dot sitting completely still in a part of town we never went to together. A place called the Harlow. I knew what the Harlow was. It was a wine bar on Clement Street with dim lighting and a reservation waitlist that stretched 6 weeks out. My co-worker Pam had gone there for her anniversary and said the bartender remembered her name on the second visit. It was not the kind of place you went alone. It was not the kind of place you went with clients. "Where were you?" I asked. He took a long sip of his beer, set it down, and then he said the thing that rearranged everything. "I need to be honest with you about something. My name is Sylvie, and I was 38 years old when my husband of 11 years sat down across from me at our kitchen table and told me he'd been seeing someone for the past 4 months. Not just someone. His supervisor, the woman who had approved his last 2 promotions, the woman I had met at the company holiday party in December, shaken hands with, said, 'It's so nice to finally put a face to the name too,' while she smiled at me with a warmth I now understood was pity. He said her name. I won't use it here. He said they hadn't planned it. He said it started after a conference in Portland in January. He said he wasn't sure what it meant yet. He said, and this is the part I keep coming back to, even now, he said he thought I deserved to know the truth, like honesty was something he was giving me. Like it was a gift. I didn't say anything for a very long time. The refrigerator hummed. A car went by outside. He was still talking, filling the silence with words that I wasn't absorbing anymore because something had shifted in my chest, very quietly, like a lock clicking into place. Not rage. Not the kind of devastation I would have predicted if you'd asked me a year ago what this would feel like. Just a cold, clear certainty. I stood up, picked up my cold chamomile, walked to the sink, and poured it out. "Okay," I said. "Okay?" He looked confused. "Thank you for telling me." I went upstairs. I washed my face. I got into bed, and I lay there in the dark with my eyes open, making a list in my head of everything I needed to do in order, starting first thing in the morning. We'd been together since I was 26. I was a paralegal when we met, working for a small firm in the Sunset District. He was in tech sales, which in San Francisco in those years meant he was constantly being taken out to dinners he didn't pay for and coming home talking about deals and pipeline and Q4 like they were the most important words in the English language. I put him through his MBA, not literally. He had a partial scholarship, but I covered our rent, our groceries, our car insurance, and our health insurance for 2 years while he went to school part-time and I worked full-time, and we told each other it was an investment in our future. After he graduated, he moved into a director role and his salary doubled. We bought our condo in the inner Richmond. We talked about starting a family. We talked about it for years the way some people talk about remodeling. Always the plan, never quite the right time. I kept working. I'd moved from paralegal to legal operations manager by then, and I was good at what I did. I knew how contracts worked. I knew how assets got divided. I knew that California is a community property state, which means that everything we had acquired together during our marriage, the condo, the joint savings account, both of our retirement contributions made during the marriage, was legally half mine. I had known this for years the way you know information that doesn't seem relevant yet. On Wednesday morning, while my husband was in the shower getting ready for work, I called a family law attorney named Patricia Voss, who had the kind of measured, unhurried voice that made you feel like she had seen everything and nothing surprised her anymore. I had found her name 6 months ago in a moment of what I'd told myself at the time was just being thorough, just being prepared, just being the kind of person who knows things. I had saved her number under the contact name PT Insurance. She had an opening at 10 a.m. He left for work at 8:15. He kissed me on the cheek. He said he'd be home by 7. He said we should talk more tonight. I said, sure. I waited until his car turned the corner, and then I sat down at my desk and started doing things. I transferred my direct deposit to a solo checking account I had opened at a different bank 2 years earlier when we were having a rough patch that passed. I had kept the account open and mostly empty ever since. I moved 3 months' worth of my salary into it. Money I had earned, money that was mine to move. I called Patricia at 10 and sat in her office on Sacramento Street for 90 minutes while she walked me through everything slowly and clearly. The way someone explains directions to a person who is trying very hard to hold them in their head. She told me what I could do immediately and what I should wait on. She told me to start documenting everything: accounts, balances, assets, dates. She told me the condo would require negotiation. She also told me something I hadn't asked about but needed to hear, that in California, an employee can report a romantic relationship between a manager and a direct report to HR, and that companies with fraternization policies, which most tech companies had, post-2018, were obligated to investigate and typically required one party to transfer or leave. I had not planned to think about that part yet. But I filed it away. I need to tell you about my friend Lena, because she matters to this story more than most people know. Lena and I have been friends since college. She is the kind of person who, when you call her at 7 a.m. and say, I need to talk, says I'll be there in 20 minutes, and actually shows up in 19. She brought coffee and she sat across from me at my kitchen table and she listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which is harder than it sounds when you're the kind of person who has opinions about everything, which Lena is. When I finished, she put her mug down and said, What do you need from me? Not, what are you going to do? Not, did you see this coming? Not, how could he? Just, what do you need? I told her I needed a witness, not in a legal sense, just someone who knew, someone who had been sitting there with me from the first day, who could look at what I was about to do and tell me I wasn't losing my mind. She said she'd be there for every step. She meant it. I didn't say anything dramatic to my husband that week. I didn't bring it up again. I kept dinner on the table at 7. I asked him about his day. I watched television with him on the couch, and I slept on my side of the bed with 8 inches of space between us and my eyes dry. He seemed relieved. He seemed to think the conversation had been processed and set aside, the way he processed most difficult things, by mentioning them once and then treating the mention as a substitute for actually dealing with them. He did not know that I had already met with Patricia twice more. He did not know that I had photographed every financial document in the house: mortgage statements, investment accounts, his 401k paperwork that he kept in a folder in the filing cabinet in the second bedroom. He did not know that Lena had introduced me to her colleague Farah, who ran a consulting business in financial planning and had spent an afternoon with me mapping out what my income looked like on its own, what a reasonable post-divorce budget would be, and what my options were. And he did not know about Sunday breakfast. Sunday was his ritual. He slept in, and I made a big breakfast. Eggs, fruit, the good coffee from the bag in the freezer. It had been our thing for years. He'd come downstairs in his sweats, and I'd have everything on the table, and we'd read or watch something while we ate. On the 3rd Sunday after he told me, Lena came over at 8. She sat at the kitchen table with her coffee and the newspaper, and she looked so completely comfortable and at home there that when my husband came downstairs at 8:45 in his grey sweats and stopped in the kitchen doorway and found both of us sitting there, him clearly expecting the same Sunday morning he'd had for 11 years, there was a moment where the whole room just held still. He looked at Lena. Lena looked at him over her mug with an expression that was not hostile and was not warm and communicated exactly nothing except the fact of her presence. He looked at me. I said, "There's coffee," and gestured to the counter. He poured himself a cup. He sat down at the end of the table. He ate the fruit I put out. He said almost nothing. Lena and I talked about her sister's new job and a book she just finished, and the BART fare increase, and we talked as though he was simply not there. Not in a rude way, not in an icy way. Just in the way you talk when the person sitting across from you has no particular role in your conversation anymore. He left to go to the gym after 40 minutes, and did not say much on his way out. Lena looked at me when the door closed. "He has no idea," she said. "Not yet," I said. The papers were filed on a Thursday. Patricia had walked me through the timeline. Given that he had been served, he had 30 days to respond. The condo would be the complicated part. We bought it together and both names were on the deed. But we had a prenuptial agreement. Actually, we didn't. That's the thing. We had talked about a prenup once, in the year before we got married, and he had said it felt like planning for failure, and I had agreed, and we'd never done it. What we did have was 11 years of community property, half of which was mine. Patricia was very good at her job. He called me from his car at 6:15 p.m. after the process server had shown up at his office. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. He texted, "Sylvie, what is this? Can you please call me?" I was at Lena's apartment, eating takeout Thai food on her couch, watching a documentary about national parks. I set my phone face down and turned back to the screen. Lena handed me a spring roll. "Yellowstone or Grand Canyon?" "Grand Canyon," I said. "Yellowstone's overhyped. The part I haven't talked about yet is the part that happened at his company. I want to be clear about something. I didn't do it out of anger. I'm not sure I had a lot of anger left by that point. It had been replaced by something quieter and more useful. What I did because Patricia had explained to me that my husband's supervisor had real power over decisions that affected his income, and that income was going to factor into the support calculations, and I had an obligation to understand the full picture of our financial situation. I also did it because I had read his company's code of conduct online, which was publicly available on their website. And their fraternization policy was very clearly written. Employees in a supervisory relationship were required to disclose any romantic involvement to HR within 30 days of its commencement. They had been involved for 4 months by his own account. I sent an email to their HR department. I kept it factual and short. I stated that I had reason to believe a supervisory relationship existed between 2 specific employees and that I wanted to ensure the company was aware. I attached nothing. I speculated nothing. I simply created a flag. I don't know every detail of what happened internally. What I do know is that his supervisor was moved to a different team within 2 weeks, and that his role was restructured in a way that removed him from the projects she had championed, and that 3 months after that, he left the company for a position elsewhere that paid significantly less. None of that changed the division of assets. But I am not going to pretend I didn't think about it. The divorce was finalized 8 months after the Sunday morning he came home from the Harlow smelling like someone else. I got a fair settlement on the condo. We sold it and split the proceeds, which gave me enough for a down payment on a 1-bedroom in the outer Sunset, 3 blocks from the ocean. It is smaller than what I had. The closets are inadequate. There is a draft near the kitchen window in winter that I have not fully solved with weather stripping. I love it with a ferocity that still surprises me. I had started something during those 8 months, partly to fill the hours and partly because Farah had pointed out that I was spending money every month on a service I could easily provide myself and had the professional background to do competently. I became a certified financial paralegal. I was already most of the way there, and began freelancing for family law firms in the Bay Area, helping with the financial disclosure documents that are required in California, divorces, the schedule of assets and debts, the income and expense declarations. I knew these documents better than most people in the city because I had spent the last year of my life inside them. Firms started passing my name around, Within a year, I had 6 steady clients and a wait list. Within 2 years, I had incorporated, hired a part-time assistant, and was turning down more work than I was taking on. I am not going to call it a millionaire life, because that is a phrase that belongs to someone else's story, and I am careful with language now. What I will say is that last April I sat down with my accountant, a dry-humored woman named Gretchen, who has never once said anything that wasn't completely accurate, and she showed me my year-end numbers and said, "You know you're in the top 15% of individual earners in the state." "I know," she said. "I'm just making sure you know." I drove home with the windows down. It was a cold evening for April, that particular San Francisco cold that comes off the water and goes straight through whatever you're wearing. I parked in my spot, walked up the stairs, unlocked my door, and stood in my kitchen for a moment in the dark before turning the light on. It smelled like nothing, like clean air and coffee and whatever candle I'd burned last weekend. Like mine. A few months ago, Lena told me that my ex-husband had gotten engaged. She mentioned it the way you mention something you think the other person probably already knows. Lightly, watching my face. "Good for him," I said. And I meant it. Not sarcastically. I actually meant it. Whatever anger I'd carried had spent itself in those 8 months of paperwork and process, serving and learning to sleep in the center of the bed. What was left for him was the same thing I'd feel for a stranger, a vague, disinterested wish that things went okay. What I felt for myself was different, harder to name. Not triumph exactly, because triumph implies a contest, and I had stopped thinking of it as a contest somewhere around month 4. More like what happens when you've been carrying something heavy for a very long time and you finally set it down. Not because someone told you to, not because you couldn't carry it anymore, but because you got somewhere and you looked around and you thought, "This is where I'm staying." I set it down. I'm staying here. People ask me sometimes, friends, a few clients who know my history, what the moment was. The moment when I knew I was going to be okay. I don't think it was one moment, but if I had to pick the closest thing to it, I'd pick a Tuesday morning about 6 weeks after I filed, when I got up at 6 a.m. and made coffee and sat at my desk and opened my laptop and started working before the sun came up. It was just work. It was just a motion deadline and a financial disclosure that needed checking and an email I'd been putting off. Ordinary things. But I sat there doing them, and the apartment was quiet, and outside the window, the sky was doing that thing it does in the outer sunset where it goes from black to a kind of grey blue that looks like something you'd want to frame. And I thought, I built this morning. This quiet, this work. All of it is mine. Nobody handed it to me. Nobody can take it back. I've thought a lot about what actually happened the night my husband sat across from me and told me what he'd done. Not the facts of it, those I could recite in my sleep, but what happened inside me. Because it wasn't what I expected. I had always assumed that if something like that ever happened to me, I would fall apart. I had seen other people fall apart. I understood the logic of it. You build something with someone for 11 years and then the ground moves and you fall. But I didn't fall. I got very still and I started thinking. I've come to believe that's not a personality trait. It's not that I'm tougher than other people or that I cared less than I should have. I think what happened is simpler than that. I had spent 11 years learning to be competent. Quietly, without making a production of it, I had become someone who understood how things worked. Contracts, finances, the way institutions function when you know how to ask the right questions. All of that was still there. He hadn't taken any of it. He couldn't. That's the thing nobody tells you about integrity and about the work of building real skills over time. It doesn't feel like protection while you're doing it. It just feels like Tuesday. You go to work, you do your job well, you learn one more thing, you file it away. And then one day you need it, and it's there. Everything I had put into myself over those years, the paralegal training, the legal operations experience, the professional relationships, the habit of staying calm under pressure, none of that lived in our joint checking account. None of it was subject to division. What I did in those months after he told me wasn't revenge in the way people usually mean the word. I wasn't trying to hurt him. I was trying to survive. And then, slowly, I was trying to build. There's a difference. Revenge keeps your eyes on someone else. What I was doing kept my eyes on the next thing I needed to do, and the thing after that. Lena understood this. She never once asked me if I was trying to get back at him. She asked what I needed, and then she helped me get it. That kind of friendship. The kind that doesn't editorialize, that doesn't need the drama to be bigger than it is rarer than most people realize, and it's worth more than almost anything I can name. Patricia did her job with a precision that I genuinely admired. Farah showed me a version of my own financial future that I hadn't been able to see from inside the fog of those first weeks. People came through. People who were not my husband, who owed me nothing except professionalism, showed up and did their part. I think about that too. About how much of the life you end up with depends on the quality of the people you've let in along the way. My husband made a choice that was his to make. I am not interested in arguing about what kind of person that makes him. What I know is that choices have weight, and that weight goes somewhere. It went somewhere for both of us, just in opposite directions. I'm not angry at him anymore. I'm not much of anything toward him. What I am is grateful, in a way I couldn't have predicted, for the Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after I filed, when I sat at my desk before sunrise and did my work and felt, for the first time in longer than I could remember, completely and entirely like myself. That morning was mine. Not because he gave it to me, because I built it.